It was one of those cold, crisp evenings in New York City. The kind where the air feels sharp against your skin, but carries just enough promise to make you feel alive. Alexander Hartwell stepped out of his sleek black car, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit before walking into an upscale restaurant tucked away on the quieter side of Manhattan. He wasn't here for fun. This was business. A group of potential investors waited inside, ready to discuss his latest project, a chain of eco-friendly luxury hotels designed to blend sustainability with opulence. Alexander had always been a man who thrived under pressure. His life was built around numbers, strategies, and calculated risks. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the city lights reflected off the glass windows of the restaurant, or maybe it was the nagging thought at the back of his mind that he couldn't quite shake off. Whatever it was, he brushed it aside as he entered the warm, dimly lit space. The hostess greeted him with a polite smile and led him to a corner table near the window. As he settled into his seat, he glanced around the room, taking in the elegant decor, the soft glow of chandeliers, the faint hum of conversation, and the gentle clinking of glasses. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. And then, it happened. A voice broke through the quiet murmur of the dining area. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you started with something to drink?" At first, Alexander didn't look up. He assumed it was just another server doing their job. But when he finally raised his head, his breath caught in his throat. Standing there holding a notepad and pen was someone who looked eerily familiar. Her hair was shorter now, styled in soft waves instead of the wild curls he remembered. She wore a modest black uniform that did little to hide the warmth in her smile. For a split second, Alexander froze. Could it really be her? No, it couldn't be. This was impossible. And yet, when their eyes met, recognition flickered across her face too. There was no mistaking it. It was her, Emily Carter, the woman he once loved more than anything in the world. His heart pounded in his chest as memories came rushing back like a tidal wave. He remembered lazy afternoons spent laughing together in a small-town park. He remembered late-night talks about their dreams, his aspirations of building an empire and hers of becoming a renowned artist. Most of all, he remembered the day they said goodbye, promising to stay connected despite the miles between them. Those promises hadn't lasted long. Life got in the way, as it often does, and eventually they drifted apart. But seeing her now, standing right in front of him, felt surreal. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background, leaving only the two of them suspended in time. Then reality snapped back into focus. Emily quickly masked her surprise with a polite smile, jotting down his order as if nothing unusual had happened. "Water will be fine," Alexander managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded curtly, avoiding his gaze as she turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. Alexander sat there, stunned, replaying the encounter over and over in his mind. What was she doing here? How could fate bring them back together like this? More importantly, why did she seem so different? He tried to focus on the meeting ahead, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Every time she passed by his table to serve water or check on the other guests, he found himself stealing glances at her. Each time she avoided making eye contact, moving efficiently from one task to the next as though determined to keep things professional. By the end of the evening, Alexander's mind was racing. The investors left satisfied, impressed by his pitch and confident in his vision. But none of that mattered to him anymore. All he could think about was Emily. Why was she working as a waitress? What had happened to the passionate, dream-chasing woman he used to know? And most importantly, would she ever forgive him for leaving her behind all those years ago? As he stood up to leave, Alexander hesitated. He wanted answers, but he also knew he couldn't demand them. Not here, not now. Instead, he decided to wait. If there was even the slightest chance of reconnecting with Emily, he wasn't going to let it slip away. With one last glance toward the kitchen door, he walked out of the restaurant, his mind swirling with questions and emotions he hadn't felt in years. Little did he know, this unexpected reunion was only the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about the woman he had seen at the restaurant. Her face lingered in his mind, those soft eyes that once sparkled with dreams, now tinged with something else. Sadness? Resignation? He wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. Seeing her brought back a flood of memories, some sweet and others painfully bittersweet. He found himself sitting in his penthouse office, staring out at the sprawling city skyline. The view used to fill him with pride, a reminder of how far he'd come from his humble beginnings. But today it felt hollow. His thoughts drifted back to a simpler time, a time when life wasn't about boardroom meetings or billion-dollar deals, but about laughter, shared dreams, and stolen moments under the stars. Alexander grew up in a small town, surrounded by fields and open skies. Back then, money was tight, but love wasn't. His family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. It was during those years that he met her. She was everything he wasn't: creative, free-spirited, unafraid to chase her passions. While he spent his days buried in books, determined to secure scholarships and build a better future, she painted. Her art was breathtaking, capturing emotions and stories in ways words never could. They were opposites, yet somehow, they fit perfectly together. They dreamed big, talking late into the night about their futures. He wanted to conquer the world of business, while she envisioned her paintings hanging in galleries around the globe. Together, they promised to support each other, no matter what. Those promises felt unbreakable at the time, like nothing could ever tear them apart. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. When Alexander landed a prestigious internship in New York City, it seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. He begged her to come with him, but she refused. Her father had fallen ill, and she felt tied to her hometown, caring for him while trying to keep her own dreams alive. At first, they stayed in touch through letters and phone calls, clinging to the hope that distance wouldn't change things. But slowly, inevitably, it did. Letters became less frequent, phone calls shorter. Eventually, silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional update from mutual friends. Alexander threw himself into his work, burying the ache of losing her beneath layers of ambition and success. Over time, he convinced himself that moving on was the right thing to do. After all, he told himself, people grow apart. It's just how life works. Yet deep down, he never truly forgot her. Even as his career skyrocketed and his name became synonymous with wealth and power, there was always a part of him that wondered what might have been. He often imagined running into her again someday, perhaps at a gallery opening or a charity event. In his fantasies, she would be successful, happy, living the life she deserved. Never in a million years did he expect to see her serving tables at a restaurant. Now sitting in his office, Alexander tried to piece together what could have gone wrong. What had happened to the bright-eyed artist who once dreamed of changing the world with her paintings? Why was she working as a waitress instead of pursuing her passion? The questions gnawed at him, refusing to let go. He opened his laptop and started searching online, hoping to find some trace of her. Maybe she had an Instagram account showcasing her latest artwork, or maybe there was news about an exhibition featuring her pieces. But as he scrolled through page after page, he found nothing. No social media profiles, no interviews, no mention of her name anywhere. It was as if she had vanished from the art scene entirely. Frustration bubbled inside him. How could someone so talented simply fade away? Had she given up on her dreams? Or had circumstances forced her hand? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Not at her, but at himself. He should have reached out sooner. He should have checked in, made sure she was okay. Instead, he had let pride and fear stand in the way, assuming she didn't want anything to do with him anymore. As the hours ticked by, Alexander realized something important. This wasn't just about guilt or regret. Seeing her again stirred feelings he thought he'd buried forever. Feelings of love, longing, and admiration. She may have changed, but the connection they once shared still felt real, raw, and undeniable. By the time evening rolled around, Alexander knew what he had to do. He couldn't just walk away this time, not without understanding what had happened to her, and not without finding a way to make things right. He picked up his phone and dialed the number of his assistant. "Cancel my meetings tomorrow," he said firmly. "I need the day off." For the first time in years, Alexander Hartwell put aside his work and focused on something, or rather, someone else. As he prepared to return to the restaurant, the following evening, his heart raced with anticipation. Would she talk to him? Would she even remember him? There were no guarantees, but one thing was clear. He owed it to both of them to try. Little did he know, the answers he sought would reveal far more than he bargained for, and force him to confront parts of himself he'd long ignored. The next evening, Alexander walked into the same restaurant with a mix of nerves and determination. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, maybe a chance to talk to her, or at least catch her eye again, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't just let her slip away without trying. This time, though, he didn't come dressed in his usual sharp suit. Instead, he wore something more casual, hoping to blend in and avoid drawing attention to himself. He chose a table near the corner, close enough to see her but far enough not to disrupt her work. As she moved between tables, balancing trays and refilling drinks, he noticed how effortlessly graceful she was. There was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, even if her smile seemed a little forced. Every now and then, their eyes would meet briefly before she quickly looked away. It was clear she recognized him too, but she made no move to approach him. Alexander tried to focus on his meal, picking at the food without much appetite. His mind kept replaying their brief encounter from the night before, the shock on her face, the awkward silence that followed, and the way she disappeared into the kitchen like she couldn't get away fast enough. Was she avoiding him? Did she still feel hurt by the past? Or was she simply too busy to think about it? Finally, after what felt like hours, he saw his chance. She was clearing a nearby table, stacking plates onto a tray with practiced ease. Summoning every ounce of courage, he stood up and walked over to her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the low hum of conversations around them. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, then she gave him a polite nod. "Hi, Alexander stumbled over his words, suddenly feeling like a teenager asking someone out for the first time. "I wanted to say, I didn't expect to see you here, of all places." She let out a small laugh, though it lacked any real humor. "Yeah, funny how life works sometimes, huh?" Her tone was light, almost dismissive, but Alexander could sense the tension beneath it. He hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. "Look, I know this is probably weird for you. Seeing me again, but I wanted to make sure you're okay." Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding, and for a split second, he thought she might walk away. Instead, she sighed and glanced toward the kitchen as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice steady but distant. "Just doing my job." "That's not what I meant," he pressed gently. "I meant, are you okay? Really?" She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his face as if trying to decide whether he was being sincere. Finally, she shrugged. "Life's been complicated, but I'm managing." Before he could respond, another server called her name from across the room. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at him. "Listen, I should get back to work. Thanks for asking, though." And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the chaos of the busy restaurant. Alexander returned to his seat, feeling both relieved and frustrated. Relieved because she hadn't completely shut him out, and frustrated because he still had so many unanswered questions. Over the next few days, Alexander found himself returning to the restaurant repeatedly, always choosing a different table, and ordering something random off the menu. Each time he hoped for another chance to talk to her, even if it was just for a few minutes. But she remained elusive, keeping her distance while going about her duties with quiet efficiency. One evening, as he sat nursing a cup of coffee, She approached his table with a hesitant smile. "You've been here a lot lately," she said, setting down the check. He looked up, surprised by her boldness. "Is that a problem?" "No, not at all," she replied quickly. "I just figured you weren't really here for the food." Alexander chuckled, appreciating her honesty. "You caught me. I guess I've been hoping we could talk. Properly, I mean." She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room as if weighing her options. After a pause, she nodded. "Okay, but not here. If you're serious about talking, meet me outside after my shift ends, around 10. Relief washed over him, followed by a surge of nervous excitement. 10 o'clock. Got it. True to her word, she waited for him outside the restaurant when his car pulled up later that night. She was wearing a plain jacket over her uniform, her hair tucked behind her ears. The city lights cast a soft glow on her face, making her look younger somehow, more like the person he remembered from years ago. They started walking aimlessly, neither of them saying much at first. The streets were quieter now, the hustle and bustle of the day replaced by the gentle hum of passing cars and distant music. Eventually, she broke the silence. "You must have a lot of questions," she said, her voice softer than before. "I do," he admitted. "But mostly, I just want to understand what happened to you. To us." She stopped walking and turned, to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "A lot of things happened, okay? Things I never planned for. My dad got sick, and I had to take care of him. By the time he passed away, I was drowning in medical bills. Art wasn't paying the rent anymore, so I took whatever jobs I could find, and honestly, I haven't picked up a paintbrush in years." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had no idea she'd been through so much. All this time, he had assumed she was living her dream, thriving in ways he couldn't imagine. The reality was far harsher and far more heartbreaking. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there for you. I should have known." She shook her head, forcing a small smile. "You can't blame yourself for something you didn't know. Besides, it's not your responsibility to fix my problems. But maybe it is," he countered, surprising even himself with the intensity in his voice. "You mattered to me once. You still matter to me. I don't want to lose you again, not without fighting for you this time." For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a pen, scribbling something on a crumpled receipt. Handing it to him, she said, "If you're serious about fixing things, call me tomorrow. We'll talk then." As she walked away, Alexander stared at the piece of paper in his hand, her number scrawled hastily across it. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, tentative spark that promised something better might be possible. But deep down, he also knew that earning her trust wouldn't be easy. Too much time had passed and too many wounds had festered unhealed. If they were going to rebuild what they once had, it would take more than apologies and promises. It would take patience, understanding, and a willingness to confront the mistakes of the past. Little did he know, the hardest part of their journey was yet to come. The next morning, Alexander stared at the crumpled receipt on his bedside table. Her number was scribbled in hurried handwriting, smudged slightly as if she'd been in a rush when she wrote it. He picked it up carefully, running his fingers over the ink like it might disappear if he didn't hold on to it tightly enough. His mind raced with questions. What would he say? How could he begin to make amends for years of silence and neglect? And most importantly, would she even answer when he called? He decided not to wait too long. Picking up his phone, he dialed the number, his heart pounding in his chest. Each ring felt like an eternity. Just as he started to think she wouldn't pick up, her voice came through the line, soft but steady. "Hello? It's me," he said quickly, almost tripping over his words. "From last night. I hope this isn't a bad time." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a small laugh. "I figured you'd call sooner or later. What's up?" "I just wanted to see if we could meet again," he admitted, his tone earnest. "To talk more, properly this time." She hesitated for a moment before replying. Okay, there's a cafe near my apartment. Quiet, not too crowded. Let's meet there tomorrow afternoon. Relief washed over him. Tomorrow works, thank you, for giving me another chance. Her response was simple but telling. We'll see how it goes. The cafe she suggested was cozy, tucked away on a quiet street lined with trees. When Alexander arrived, she was already seated at a corner table sipping a cup of tea. She looked different today, less guarded, more relaxed. Seeing her there, waiting for him, filled him with a strange mix of excitement and dread. This conversation could go either way, and he knew he had to tread carefully. He slid into the chair across from her, smiling nervously. Hey, thanks for meeting me. She nodded, setting her cup down. You're welcome, so what exactly did you want to talk about? Alexander took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I guess I want to start by saying I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving without looking back, for assuming you were okay when clearly you weren't, and for showing up out of nowhere after all these years like nothing ever happened. I know I messed up and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or at all. But I needed you to know that I regret letting you go without fighting harder for us. Her expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained cautious. It's not just about forgiveness, you know. It's about understanding why things turned out the way they did. You left because you had dreams, ambitions. It wasn't your fault that life pulled us apart. But she trailed off, staring into her teacup as if searching for the right words. But what? He prompted gently. But it hurt, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not hearing from you, watching you build this incredible life while mine fell apart. It hurt more than I can explain. And yeah, maybe part of me resented you for moving on so easily. But mostly, I just missed you. Missed us. Hearing her say those words hit him like a freight train. All this time he had convinced himself that their separation was inevitable, that they both moved on and found happiness elsewhere. But the truth was far messier and far more painful. I never stopped caring about you, he confessed, his voice trembling. Even when I told myself I had, there was always this emptiness, like something vital was missing. And now I realize it was you. Every success, every achievement, it meant nothing without someone to share it with. Without you. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, unwilling to let her emotions overwhelm her. That's sweet, but it doesn't change anything. My life isn't what it used to be. I'm not who I used to be. The girl you fell in love with is gone, and honestly, I don't know if she'll ever come back. That's not true, he insisted, leaning forward. Maybe parts of you have changed, but the essence of who you are, the kindness, the strength, the creativity, that's still there. I saw it the moment I recognized you in that restaurant. You may not paint anymore, but that doesn't mean it's too late to start again. If anyone can reclaim their dreams, it's you. She shook her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. You always did have a way with words. But dreams aren't cheap, you know. They cost time, energy, money, all things I haven't had much of lately. That's where I come in, he said firmly. Let me help you, not because I feel guilty, but because I believe in you, in your talent, in your potential. You deserve a second chance, and I want to be the one to give it to you. For the first time since they reconnected, she laughed. A genuine, warm laugh that lit up her entire face. You really haven't changed, have you? Still trying to fix everything with grand gestures? It's not a gesture, he replied, his tone serious. It's a promise, a partnership. Whatever you need. Studio, space, supplies, connections, I'll make it happen. All I ask is that you trust me enough to try. She studied him for a long moment, weighing his sincerity against the doubts that lingered in her mind. Finally, she sighed and nodded. Okay, I'll think about it. But no guarantees, all right? This isn't some fairy tale where everything magically falls into place overnight. That's fair, he agreed, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within him. one step at a time. As they continued talking, the tension between them began to ease. They reminisced about old memories, shared stories of the years they spent apart, and cautiously explored the possibility of rebuilding what they once had. By the time they left the cafe, there was a tentative sense of optimism in the air, an unspoken agreement to take things slow and see where this new chapter might lead. But as Alexander drove home that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. While he had taken the first step toward healing the wounds of the past, he knew there were still challenges ahead. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, and neither was love. Still, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream again, not just about success or wealth, but about a future where she stood beside him, whole and happy. It was a fragile hope, delicate and uncertain, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. Over the next few weeks, Alexander and Emily began spending more time together. At first, their meetings were cautious, coffee dates at quiet cafes, walks through parks where they could talk without interruptions. Slowly but surely, the walls between them started to crumble. They laughed about old memories, shared stories of the years they'd spent apart, and even dared to dream about what the future might hold. But beneath the surface, there were still scars that needed tending to, wounds from the past that hadn't fully healed. Alexander knew he couldn't rush this process. Trust wasn't something you could rebuild overnight, especially when it had been broken so completely. Every time she hesitated before agreeing to meet him or changed the subject when things got too personal, he reminded himself to be patient. He owed her that much, and so much more. One afternoon, as they strolled along a riverside path lined with golden autumn leaves, Emily stopped suddenly and turned to face him. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and suspicion. "I mean, really, why now? After all these years, why do you suddenly care so much?" Her question caught him off guard, but it was one he'd been expecting. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before answering. "Because I realized I made a mistake, a huge one. When I left, I told myself it was for the best, that we'd both move on and find happiness in our own ways. But deep down, I think I always knew I was lying to myself. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and not a day went by when I didn't wonder what could have been if I'd stayed. Seeing you again, it woke me up. It reminded me of what truly matters." She looked away, her gaze fixed on the rippling water of the river. "That's a nice speech," she said softly. "But saying sorry doesn't erase the pain. You can't just walk back into someone's life and expect everything to go back to how it was." "I'm not expecting that," he replied quickly. "I know we can't turn back time. All I'm asking is for a chance, to prove to you that I've changed, that I'm willing to fight for us this time, no matter how long it takes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves overhead and the distant chirping of birds. Then, Emily let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll give you that chance. But don't make promises you can't keep. And don't treat me like some project you need to fix. I'm not broken." "I know that," he said earnestly. "You're strong, braver than anyone I've ever met. What I want is to stand beside you, not above you. To support you in whatever way you need." Her expression softened, though a hint of skepticism remained. "We'll see." As promised, Alexander helped her set up a small art studio in a rented space near her apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, a modest room with large windows that let in plenty of natural light, but it was enough to get her started. He stocked it with canvases, paints, brushes, and everything else she might need. When she protested, saying she didn't want charity, he insisted it wasn't charity. It was an investment in her talent. At first, Emily struggled to pick up where she'd left off. Years of putting her dreams on hold had taken their toll, leaving her unsure of whether she still had what it took to create meaningful art. Some days she stared at blank canvases for hours, paralyzed by self-doubt. Other days, she painted furiously, only to scrap her work entirely because it didn't feel right. Through it all, Alexander was there, offering encouragement without pushing too hard. He brought her snacks during long painting sessions, listened to her frustrations without judgment, and celebrated every tiny victory no matter how small. Gradually, she began to rediscover the joy she used to find in creating art. Her brushstrokes grew bolder, her colors brighter, and her pieces more expressive. One evening, as they sat together in the studio surrounded by half-finished paintings, Emily turned to him with a smile. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "Always." But even as things improved, shadows of the past still lingered. Emily worried that she would never fit into his glamorous world, that her simplicity would pale in comparison to the opulence he was accustomed to. Meanwhile, Alexander feared repeating the same mistakes that drove them apart years ago. Both knew they needed to confront these fears head-on if they wanted a future together. One rainy night, after a particularly emotional conversation, Emily finally voiced what had been weighing on her mind. "What happens if this doesn't work out?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If we try and fail, won't it hurt even worse the second time around?" Alexander pulled her close, holding her tightly, as if afraid she might slip away. "Then we'll deal with it," he said firmly. "Life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about facing it together. If we fall, we'll pick ourselves back up. That's what love is supposed to be, isn't it? A partnership where two people lift each other up instead of tearing each other down." Tears streamed down her face as she buried her head against his chest. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Not just for a better future, but for a second chance at happiness. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, their bond grew stronger. Late-night conversations turned into shared meals, laughter-filled outings, and quiet moments watching sunsets. They learned to navigate the complexities of their relationship, addressing old wounds while building new memories. Emily's art flourished under his support, and soon she began preparing for her first gallery exhibition in years. The event was set for the following spring, and excitement buzzed in the air as they worked side by side to make it happen. On the day of the exhibition, Alexander stood proudly in the corner of the gallery, watching as crowds of admirers gathered around Emily's paintings. Each piece told a story of love, loss, resilience, and hope. Among them was a painting titled "Second Chances," depicting two figures walking toward each other under a starlit sky. It was clear who inspired it. As Emily mingled with guests, glowing with pride, Alexander felt a surge of gratitude. This journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Together they had faced their fears, confronted their pasts, and emerged stronger than ever. And yet, as he watched her laugh and chat with visitors, he realized something important. Their story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There were still chapters waiting to be written, adventures waiting to be had, and countless opportunities to grow together. With a smile, he slipped quietly out of the gallery and headed upstairs to the rooftop terrace. Underneath the twinkling city lights, he prepared to take the final step in their journey, a step that would seal their commitment to each other once and for all. The rooftop terrace was bathed in the soft glow of city lights, the kind that made New York feel magical even on a chilly spring night. Alexander stood near the edge, gazing out at the skyline as his heart raced with anticipation. In his pocket, he clutched a small velvet box containing a ring, a symbol of everything they had been through and everything he hoped they could become. He knew this moment wouldn't be easy. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and trust, the very things they had worked so hard to rebuild over the past months. Emily arrived a few minutes later, her cheeks flushed from the excitement of the gallery opening downstairs. She looked stunning. In a simple yet elegant dress, her hair swept back in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. When she saw him standing there alone, she paused, surprised, but curious. "You disappeared," she said with a playful smile, walking toward him. "I thought you'd vanished into thin air." He chuckled nervously, turning to face her. "Not exactly, I just needed some fresh air, and I wanted to talk to you, just us, without all the noise." Her expression softened as she stepped closer. What's on your mind? For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how to begin. Then, taking a deep breath, he reached for her hand. Do you remember when we first met? Back in that little town where life felt so simple, so full of promise? She nodded, her eyes meeting his. Of course I do. How could I forget? We used to dream big back then, he continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You wanted to be an artist whose work touched people's hearts, and I wanted to build something that mattered. We promised each other we'd always support each other's dreams no matter what. And we broke that promise, she added softly, her gaze dropping to the ground. Yes, we did, he admitted. But not because we stopped caring, because life got in the way, and because I let fear and pride stand between us. I walked away when things got tough, thinking I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. So wrong. Tears welled up in her eyes as she listened, her grip tightening around his hand. Why are you telling me this now? Because I don't want to make the same mistake again, he said firmly. Tonight, seeing your paintings hanging in that gallery, it reminded me of who you are, of who we are. You've inspired me in ways I can't put into words, and I realize something important. None of my success means anything without you by my side. With trembling hands, he pulled the velvet box from his pocket and knelt down on one knee. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Emily, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I've spent my life chasing achievements, building empires, proving myself to the world, but none of it matters if I'm not sharing it with the person I love most. Will you give us another chance to finish what we started, to build a future together? Time seemed to stand still as she processed his words. The rooftop was silent, except for the distant hum of the city below. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded, throwing her arms around him. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking with happiness. Yes, yes, yes. Relief washed over him as he slipped the ring onto her finger, pulling her close for a kiss. For the first time in years, he felt whole, as if a missing piece of his soul had finally clicked back into place. In the weeks that followed, their lives began to intertwine in new and beautiful ways. Emily threw herself into her art with renewed passion, creating pieces that captured the essence of their journey: love, loss, resilience, and redemption. Alexander supported her every step of the way, attending exhibitions, introducing her to influential figures in the art world, and cheering her on from the sidelines. Together, they also explored new adventures. They traveled to places they'd always dreamed of visiting, tried activities neither of them had ever attempted before, and laughed until their sides hurt over silly jokes only they understood. Slowly but surely, they built a life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision for the future. Of course, challenges still arose. Old insecurities occasionally resurfaced, and moments of doubt crept in when life became overwhelming. But instead of letting those fears drive them apart, they faced them together, communicating openly, supporting each other, and reminding themselves of the promises they'd made. One evening, as they sat on a beach watching the sunset, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. Do you think we'll ever stop feeling like we're making up for lost time? He smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Maybe not, but maybe that's okay. Every moment we have now feels like a gift, a second chance we didn't think we'd get, and I don't plan on wasting a single one. She rested her head against his shoulder, content and peaceful. Me neither. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and savoring the beauty of the moment. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they were ready to face it. Together, they had proven that true love isn't about perfection or fairy tale endings. It's about choosing each other day after day, even when life gets messy. It's about forgiveness, growth, and the courage to start over when the odds seem impossible. And as they walked off the beach hand in hand, they knew one thing for certain. Their story wasn't just about second chances, it was about forever.